In this episode, we focus on a skill that separates reactive security from mature security, noticing early warning signals of storage misconfiguration and responding while the problem is still small. Storage misconfiguration is any setting, policy, or access decision that does not match the intended security posture for the data, and the reason it becomes headlines is that misconfigurations can quietly expose large amounts of information without breaking anything obvious. Many incidents are not discovered because systems failed. They are discovered because someone external finds the data, an internal audit stumbles on it, or a security team sees suspicious access after the fact. The goal here is to respond to signals, meaning clues that something is drifting out of alignment, before there is evidence of theft or public exposure. That response is not just about flipping a switch back to private, because rushed fixes can break applications or destroy evidence. A good response is deliberate, preserves context, and closes the gap in a way that stays closed, which is why we will talk about signal types, triage thinking, safe containment, and durable correction. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start with what a signal actually is in this context, because beginners often imagine a signal as a clear alarm that says your storage is public. In reality, signals are often indirect, like a permission change that seems unusual, a sudden increase in anonymous requests, an unexpected spike in failed access attempts, or a new storage location appearing outside the normal provisioning path. A signal can also be a human signal, like a developer saying they had to grant broad access to get something working, or a partner requesting a sharing link that bypasses identity. Another common signal is discovery of unowned storage, meaning a container or bucket exists, but nobody can clearly explain what it is for or who is responsible for it. Signals are valuable because they show you where risk is increasing, even if no harm has happened yet. The biggest mistake organizations make is ignoring low-grade signals because nothing bad has happened so far, which is like ignoring smoke because you do not yet see flames. Responding early is often cheaper, less disruptive, and more effective than responding after data is known to be exposed. Once you spot a signal, the next step is triage, which means deciding how urgent it is and what to do first. Triage begins with understanding the data and the exposure surface, because not all misconfigurations carry the same impact. If the storage contains public website images, the risk is different than if it contains customer records, credentials, or internal logs. If the misconfiguration allows public listing and reading, the risk is higher than if it allows only a narrow internal identity to read more than intended. If the misconfiguration has existed for months, the chance of access by unintended parties is higher than if it just happened, though you cannot assume that time alone tells the full story. Triage also asks whether the misconfiguration affects availability, because some fixes can break applications if done blindly. A mature approach is to classify the signal with a few grounded questions. What data is involved? What access is currently possible? Who is using it normally? And what evidence do we have of abnormal usage? The goal is to move from vague concern to concrete understanding quickly. A core response principle is to preserve evidence before you change too much, because misconfiguration incidents often require you to answer hard questions later. You may need to show when the change occurred, who made it, what data could have been accessed, and whether there are signs of exfiltration or probing. If you immediately delete logs, rotate everything without tracking, or wipe the storage location, you might remove the very information you need to understand impact. Preserving evidence does not mean you delay containment, but it means you take a careful approach that keeps the timeline and context intact. Logging discipline matters here, because your ability to respond well depends on having records of access events and permission events. It also matters how you communicate internally, because notes about what you observed, what you changed, and why you changed it become part of your evidence trail. Beginners sometimes think response is only technical, but in reality response is also documentation and coordination, because clarity prevents repeated mistakes and supports accountability. Containment is usually the next priority, but containment should be precise rather than destructive. The objective is to reduce exposure quickly while minimizing unnecessary disruption. If the signal suggests public access, containment might involve removing anonymous access or broad public permissions, but you want to confirm what workflows depend on that access so you do not break a legitimate public use case by accident. If the signal suggests an identity has overly broad access, containment might involve narrowing that identity's permissions or temporarily disabling it, but you want to understand whether that identity is used by an application that will fail. Tight data boundaries help in these moments because they allow you to isolate one boundary without impacting everything else. Another containment approach is to restrict where access can come from, such as narrowing access to trusted networks. But the exact method is less important than the principle. Reduce the attack surface while you continue investigating. The beginner takeaway is that containment should shrink the window of exposure while preserving your ability to learn what happened. After containment, you need root cause thinking, because if you only fix the symptom, the same misconfiguration will likely return. Root cause might be a human mistake, like selecting a too broad sharing option, but it might also be a process gap, like a deployment template that defaults to permissive settings. It might be a misunderstanding, like a team assuming a storage boundary is private because it is in a private project, even though permissions allow broad access. It might be an ownership gap, where nobody reviews permission changes, so risky changes persist unnoticed. Root cause might also involve incentives, where teams are rewarded for speed and punished for outages, so they choose permissive access as the safest way to avoid breaking workflows. Responding before headlines means you are willing to ask why the misconfiguration happened in the first place, not in a blame-focused way, but in a system-focused way. When you fix the process, you reduce future risk more than any single corrective change. A useful method for durable correction is to convert one-off exceptions into controlled patterns, because exceptions are where misconfigurations thrive. For example, if a team needed to share a dataset with a partner and they used a broad public link, that is a signal that there is no safe, easy way to share externally. A durable correction is to define a standard external sharing pattern that is identity-based, time-limited, scoped to a boundary, and monitored for abnormal usage. If a team made a storage location public to serve application assets, that may indicate the architecture needs a separate boundary designed for public content, leaving sensitive boundaries locked down. If an engineer granted broad permissions to get a job running, that may indicate the permission model is too complex or poorly documented, and the safe path is not clear. Durable correction is about making the secure approach the easiest approach, because when security is the path of least resistance, misconfigurations drop dramatically. Beginners should notice that this is not a technology point as much as it is a design point. Another part of responding early is building feedback loops, meaning you use each signal as a chance to improve detection and prevention going forward. If you found a misconfiguration because an external scanner detected public access, you should ask why internal monitoring did not catch it sooner. If you found it through an audit, you should ask whether continuous checks could detect similar drift. If you found it because of an anomalous access spike, you should ask whether better baselines or better alert tuning could have caught earlier stages like enumeration or probing. Feedback loops also include education, where you share the lesson with teams in a way that helps them avoid repeating it. The goal is not to scare people, but to give them a clearer mental model of how storage risk happens. Over time, these loops turn incidents and near misses into improvements in architecture, policy, and habits, which is the hallmark of a resilient program. Communication is a critical response skill because misconfiguration events often create uncertainty, and uncertainty can lead to panic or to denial. The people who own the data need to understand what might be exposed, what is being done to contain it, and what they should do right now. The security team needs a clear timeline and a clear picture of changes made, so they can coordinate investigation and reporting. Leadership may need a plain language summary of risk, potential impact, and next steps, especially if customer trust or compliance obligations are involved. Good communication avoids speculation, sticks to what is known, and clearly labels what is still being investigated. It also avoids minimizing the issue, because small misconfigurations can be serious if the data is sensitive, even if you caught them early. For beginners, this is a reminder that security is a team sport, and your response quality depends as much on clarity and coordination as it does on technical action. You should also understand the concept of validating the fix, because misconfiguration response does not end when you change a setting. You need to confirm that the storage boundary is now aligned with intended access, that normal workflows still function, and that you did not create a new gap while closing the old one. Validation also includes checking for residual risky artifacts, like old sharing mechanisms that still work, outdated permissions that still linger, or copies of data that were moved into less protected areas during the incident window. It includes watching access logs after the fix, because an attacker who previously had access might try again, and that attempt can become a strong signal of compromise. Validation is part of durability, because it prevents the pattern where teams fix a symptom, declare victory, and then discover weeks later that the exposure still existed in a different form. For a beginner, validation is simply the habit of verifying reality matches intent, not assuming a change solved the problem. Finally, responding to misconfiguration signals before they become headlines is about building a culture of early correction and engineered safety. Signals will keep appearing because cloud environments change constantly, people experiment, and new workflows are created under pressure. The win is not eliminating change. The win is making drift visible, making response repeatable, and making fixes durable. When you treat permission changes as meaningful events, when you maintain good logs, and when you know what normal access looks like, you can catch misconfigurations at the signal stage rather than the breach stage. When you triage based on data sensitivity and access surface, you focus effort where it matters most. When you contain precisely and preserve evidence, you reduce impact while keeping the ability to answer hard questions. When you chase root causes and convert exceptions into standard patterns, you prevent repetition. And when you validate fixes and strengthen feedback loops, you turn each close call into better architecture and better habits, which is how you keep storage incidents out of the headlines in the first place.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.